Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. The quadrilateral security dialogue between the US, Japan, India, and Australia held a foreign ministers meeting in Washington, D.C. on July 1st. Although bilateral disputes over trade and other issues have already caused friction among the four countries, US Secretary of State Rubio is still trying to rally allies to strengthen checks on China. According to Mainland Observer, in reality, all three of America's allies have their own hidden agendas. When welcoming representatives from the three countries, Rubio said that the Quad member states are important strategic partners and that there should be less negotiation and more focus on actions in economic and security cooperation. He emphasized that now is the time to take concrete action on specific issues. Around 30 to 40 companies from the Quad member countries held a meeting at the U.S. State Department to discuss cooperation on diversifying supply chains, with a particular focus on the critical minerals sector currently dominated by China. Although the joint statement by the four foreign ministers did not directly name China, it claimed that the four countries reaffirmed their commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific, and at the same time announced the launch of the so-called Quad Critical Minerals Initiative. In addition, according to Nikkei Asia, on the eve of the Quad talks, Rubio also told reporters that he is working to diversify the global supply chain for critical minerals. He emphasized that it's not just about securing access to raw materials, but also about ensuring the capability to process and refine them into usable materials. He hopes that the Quad can make real progress on this issue. AFP reported that after U.S. President Trump took office this January, Rubio convened the first Quad security dialogue on Inauguration Day to demonstrate America's determination and strength in leading Indo-Pacific affairs and countering China. However, since then, his attention has mainly focused on the Middle East, the Ukraine issue, and domestic priorities. Now, it seems that the U.S. focus has once again shifted back to Asia, with China as its main target. But the reality is that under Trump's tariff threats, allies have long been divided and harboring their own agendas. This is evident from the issues each foreign minister emphasized when meeting the press. Everyone is only concerned about matters that affect their own interests. Nikkei Asia pointed out that this meeting was held at a time when trade and other bilateral tensions between the Trump administration and the members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue were intensifying. Reuters also reported that in the global tariff offensive launched by Trump, none of the member countries were spared. Regarding relations with Japan, Trump hinted that the U.S. would not reach any trade agreement with Japan before the so-called reciprocal tariff negotiation deadline on July 9. He also criticized Japan for refusing to buy American cars and rice while exporting goods to the U.S., calling it a spoiled country. In addition, due to continuous pressure from the U.S. demanding that Japan further increase its defense spending, Japan suddenly announced the postponement of the U.S.-Japan 2+2 high-level talks that had been in preparation for half a year. Nicholas, from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, SecondEI believes that tariff negotiations have taken over the entire agenda. Japan is clearly dissatisfied with the U.S. government's public lecturing on defense spending. Beyond tariffs, Australia is concerned that in June, the U.S. Department of Defense officially announced it had begun a reassessment of the AUKUS Trilateral Security Partnership Agreement signed during the Biden administration by the U.S., UK, and Australia, to determine whether to withdraw from selling nuclear submarines to Australia and sharing technology under the AUKUS agreement. The reassessment is being led by U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, who has repeatedly expressed public doubts about the agreement. One of his concerns is that, given the limited production capacity in the U.S., selling such equipment to foreign countries could weaken deterrence against China, making the agreement run counter to America's own needs. Meanwhile, although Trump announced on July 1st that there was hope of reaching a trade agreement with India to help American businesses expand into the Indian market and significantly reduce the tariffs India faces, India is dissatisfied with the U.S. stance in the recent India-Pakistan conflict. Trump claimed that he was the one who brokered the ceasefire, and also said that it was his use of trade pressure that brought both sides back to the negotiating table. But his recent hosting of Pakistan's Army Chief of Staff, General Bajwa, at the White House has stirred up a huge controversy in India. At the joint press conference, Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar specifically emphasized that the international community must have zero tolerance for terrorism, and expressed hope that the quadrilateral security dialogue would understand and agree with this point. Horner, head of Japan studies at the National Security Research Department of the Doran Company, told Nikkei Asia that unlike AUKUS, the Quad security dialogue mechanism fits the needs of the Trump administration very well, because it is a zero-cost model of cooperation. He said that the United States can stand shoulder to shoulder with its three allies and claim a high degree of unity in its strategy toward China, but in reality, the U.S. does not need to make any substantive commitments. It's worth noting that last week, for the first time in 3 years, the leaders of Japan, Australia, and South Korea were absent from the annual NATO summit. Avery, Director of Political and Security Affairs at the Asia Society Policy Institute, a Washington think tank, pointed out that this shows there are serious concerns among all parties about the future of regional cooperation. The conclusion is that after the U.S. wielded the tariff stick, China did not back down, setting an example for countries around the world and at the same time putting America's allies in a dilemma. The EU, Japan, South Korea, India, Canada, and other countries and organizations, if they don't give in under Trump's pressure, will pay a heavy price. But if they do give in, it means losing not only to the US but also to China. Many allied countries are hoping to delay things as much as possible, hoping to force Trump to postpone again. In this situation, it seems that mechanisms like the quadrilateral security dialogue are unlikely to achieve any substantial cooperation, because the three countries and the US are still suspicious of each other. The previous Biden administration brought Australia on board, asking Australia to contribute money and effort to influence the South Pacific Island nations in order to counter China. But a recent report from the British media suggests that the sudden concern from the US and Australia for the South Pacific Island nations may not be yielding the desired results. According to The Guardian, Australia's Minister for Pacific Affairs, Conroy, complained that China is increasing its influence in the Pacific region through branded packaging and multilateral development projects, which has become quite a headache for the Australian government. He specifically mentioned that China has put its label on projects funded by the Asian Development Bank, ADB, with Chinese company logos seen everywhere. But in fact, Australia has also contributed a significant amount of money. Take Bougainville Island in Papua New Guinea, PNG, as an example. China Railway Construction Corporation is currently upgrading the Kita Aropa Airport runway. Last month, at the groundbreaking ceremony for this project, Bougainville's regional leaders and the Prime Minister of PNG wore safety helmets bearing the China Railway Construction logo, and there was no mention of the main funder, the ADB, during the ceremony. Conroy expressed his frustration about this, saying that the largest contributors to the Asian Development Bank are Japan and Australia, yet taxpayers' money is overshadowed by the logos of Chinese companies. He also revealed that he has pressured the Asian Development Bank to reform its procurement process, emphasizing a focus on quality rather than simply awarding contracts to the lowest bidder, and to limit the nationalization and branding of projects. Conroy's remarks touch on a familiar topic, China's influence. He admitted that there is a competition for influence in the Pacific region, with Australia hoping to be the partner of choice for island nations, while China is also actively making moves. The conservative American think tank, the Heritage Foundation, even regards Bougainville's upcoming independence process, set to occur before 2027, as a geopolitical opportunity, warning that if the U.S. does not seize this chance, it could lose its dominance in this key Indo-Pacific region. Jonathan Pryke, director of the Australia PNG network at the Lowy Institute, also emphasized Bougainville's significant strategic value, saying that it is right next to the Solomon Islands and is almost at the very center of the Pacific. However, Bougainville Autonomous Region Vice President Patrick Nzira holds a different view. He said that concerns about Chinese influence stem from skepticism in Western media. In the past 20 years, traditional Western partners have offered limited options, while Chinese companies have brought new opportunities for cooperation. He said that for Bougainville, which is in urgent need of development, these opportunities are crucial. Although there is constant hype from the West, the noise created by their politicians has not affected the deepening cooperation between China and South Pacific countries. On May 29th, the third foreign ministers' meeting between China and Pacific Island countries with which it has diplomatic relations concluded in Xiamen, Fujian, sending a strong message of win-win cooperation. Garin, an expert at the Center for Southeast Asia, Australia, and Oceania Studies of the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences, pointed out that China is different from the United States. It does not boss the island countries around and instead offers practical economic and humanitarian projects. For Pacific Island countries, China is a nation that is easy to understand, predictable, and committed to mutually beneficial cooperation. Garin emphasized that during talks, China does not dictate to Oceania countries about how they should act. On the contrary, China proposes practical cooperation initiatives to jointly promote economic development and humanitarian projects. For these countries, discussing matters with China is especially important in the face of tariff pressures from the United States. In conclusion, for Pacific Island countries, the criteria for choosing a partner are actually quite simple. Whoever can bring real development opportunities is a trustworthy partner. In fact, Rubio did say one thing right. He said it's time to take concrete action. Unfortunately, he can't break free from the mindset of American politicians, always setting up all sorts of different mechanisms. But while his words may sound nice, if he can't truly understand what public goods Southern countries need, how can he possibly compete with China,